Alright, what's going on, guys? Next project today on my 92 W250 is we're going to be doing the front kingpins on the Dana 60 front axle, and we're also going to be replacing the wheel bearings as well as the front rotors, all in front axle. This is due in part because I was getting a slight death wobble under braking applications. So I would be coming around like 50 kilometers an hour and then start to slow down and maybe hit like a bump in the road, and then my steering wheel would start to shake back and forth. So there's a few issues that can cause that problem, and it could be a number of things ranging from worn out kingpins, springs that go in the kingpin, the upper kingpins. It could also be worn tie rod ends. It could be bad wheel bearings, bad rotors, but from what I've read online, the main cause of these issues is the kingpins. But we're going to be replacing the wheel bearings anyways because one of mine was sort of bad, and we'll be doing the kingpins and the rotors since we're in there. So here is all the parts that we've got. I got the kingpin set from 4wdfactory.com. They come in individual sets, one for each side. The cap's only going to be needed on one side, as the driver's side has its own cap. They come with kingpin, spring, and then new bushings and seats, and then these are the lower bearings and seals. Then it looks like it comes with some new nuts and bolts. And then I got the front wheel bearing set for each side as well. Here's the part number on that. And here's the part numbers for the sets. They come from Yukon Gear and Axle. Same with the wheel bearing set. And then these seals are for the front axle shafts. They're two different seals. I already had an extra seal for the wheel bearing. And then I got one of these nuts with the small nipple on it, because the one that came off of my truck had a broken one on it. And this is important because it locks into a spacer which prevents the nut from backing off and your axle from falling out while you're driving, which is important. In addition to these, when you're doing your kingpins and wheel bearings, more for the kingpins, you're going to be needing special socket, because the top of these kingpins is a 7/8 hex. So I got this as well from 4WD Factory. It's 3/4 drive, and that basically just sits right in there. And you're going to need something to break it loose and torque it tight. They get torqued to 600 to 800 foot-pounds, which is quite a bit. This torque bar I got from Princess Auto was on sale. It's a pretty good deal. It was like $35 or something. This one is good up to 800 foot-pounds, so this should be pretty good. We can stick something over the end if we really need to, if we have a tough time getting it on and off. And then I got these rotors as well from local parts store. There's the part number on those. That's what they look like. Okay, so we've already torn everything apart. So maybe when I get everything back together, we can show you how it's easily disassembled with the new parts. But we've already taken the time to take everything apart so that way we could analyze and see what needed replaced. There's the old upper kingpins, and then so we cleaned up everything pretty well on both sides. There's the old axle shafts and the hub assemblies. And here's all the old parts. So we'll be able to compare the spring height of the old ones and the new ones, and we've also taken a look at some of the worn out bearings that were in the lower kingpins, and these two kingpins were fine. These are the lower ones. You can also get replacements for these if you need to, if they're broken or cracked or whatever. And so this two seals for the axle we got in there. You can also get the bearing assembly that goes in there. And there's the cap I was talking about on the driver's side, and then our hubs. All right, so we've got my new 7/8 Allen socket. That's 3/4 drive for the upper kingpin. We're gonna try and pop that out with my new breaker bar. It's about 3 feet long. This is attempt number 1. Ready? Oh. Jeez. All right, we got it out. I just want to explain how we got it out and what happened. So the breaker bar with the extension pipe did not work so much. We tried that a few times, heated up the kingpin around here, and hit on it with a hammer while trying to reef on it, and that didn't work so much. So we decided to fill up the big compressor in the house to about 170 psi, and we took our 1/2-inch drive impact, and then got our adapter for the 3/4 inch Allen socket, and then we put it on top of the kingpin after heating it up for a few minutes, and then while I was pulling the trigger on the gun, hitting it with the hammer at the same time, it started to break loose, and then it just spun right off. All right, so we just did the driver's side now. We did the same method. We didn't even try the breaker bar. We heated up the kingpin for 5 minutes with the heat from the bottom, right on the threads, and then started with the impact and just hit on it really hard with the BFH, and eventually started coming loose, and it just popped right off. Okay, so we're gonna get started here on the passenger side. First step is to make sure that everything is absolutely clean. Okay, so I've got all the bearings here, all the 4 wheel bearings and both lower bearings for the kingpins, and I'm gonna pack them all with some wheel bearing grease. It's by Lucas here. And at the same time, we put all the races in the freezer so they shrink a little bit to help the installation go smoother. Okay, so we're going to be doing the upper kingpins while we wait for the races of the lower bearings to freeze in the freezer. So we'll take our new upper kingpins, throw some red Loctite on the threads, and then thread it in by hand, and then we'll torque it down with a long breaker bar. All right, so we got our upper kingpin here with red Loctite on it. Thread that guy in. Get started by hand. Okay, I just want to give an example of the installation that we've done here. So we've got the new kingpins with the Allen socket and our breaker bar. And what we've done is we added the extension pipe just inches away from the precious Mustang, and then we reefed on the end of the extension pipe as hard as we could. And so we're just gonna have to assume that that's closest to the 600 to 800 foot-pound recommended installation rating, torque rating, given by the factory service manual. Okay, I just quickly want to show how the lower bearing assembly goes. So this would be the lower kingpin assembly with the bearing, and this is the top. So it goes the cap first, and then you put the race in from the bottom, and then you'll put in the bearing and then the seal. So just in this order. When we're putting in the seal, we're going to put a thin coat of RTV around the top here, because this cap comes in from the bottom and it sits just like that, so you need to protect it and protect water from entering in and getting to the bearing. Okay, so the race just came out of the freezer. I've installed the upper cap with the RTV on it, so now we have our cold race that hopefully will go in easier. The thick end pointing up. And try and get it seated as square as possible. We have our installation tool here. You can also use the old race if you still have it. Let's try and square it up. Okay, so we just got that installed. What we did was we used our installation tool on there, and then we had our BFH here and just smacked it sideways like that until we drove it all the way up. That worked much better. We tried it first time without putting it in the freezer, and then we just had it in the freezer for about 30 minutes, and it went in much smoother as long as you get it seated right off the bat and then just start to drive it, and then once it's seated properly, it went up pretty smoothly. Okay, I've now installed the bearing into the race, and then the seal is now going on. If you want to zoom in there a little bit, I'm using the old race to drive it in. It's it's seated on this side. I just need to finish seating it on that side. Keep knocking it out. All right, here's a quick shot of the lower seal and bearing installed now and fully seated around the outside. Okay, now that that's installed, I just want to show you I put a little bit of extra RTV around the outside of the upper cup to prevent any moisture from getting in there. And then before we install the lower kingpin itself, I've also placed a bit of grease on the seal before we place the knuckle on, and then the lower kingpin. So now that we've got both the upper and lower kingpins, or I guess you don't really call that bottom one the kingpin yet. Now that we've got those installed, we can then place the knuckle back on after greasing the upper kingpin on. All right, I've greased the upper kingpin, and now I'm going to go ahead and hang the knuckle onto the kingpin. All right, so I've hung the knuckle back onto the upper kingpin. Note, I'm not going to be greasing the outside of this knuckle, because when the bushing's in there, the bushing slides with the knuckle. So you want to grease the inside of the bushing, but not the outside of the bushing, and the kingpin, but not the knuckle. So we're going to go ahead here, and now that that's hung onto the upper kingpin, we're going to install our seal for the kingpin. So this kit comes with two different seals. Here's the old ones, and here's the new ones. Depending on what kind of vehicle you have, because they put these axles in many different vehicles, then I think this one was for some Fords, but this is for the rest of them. So here's what the old ones look like. They're more similar to these ones than these ones, so we're going to be going with these. Okay, just a bit of a recap here before we put that seal in. What I've done here is, since we didn't take the tie rods off, both the knuckles are still connected. I just temporarily hung that knuckle on the other side while I put this side on, and then we take our lower kingpin after greasing it, and I just slide it in place for now with no bolts. So now we have the upper side here, just because I didn't want the seal to get pinched by the upper side of the knuckle, so that way the knuckle's in the proper place and it doesn't accidentally pinch down on the seal and tear it. So now we can place that seal into the bottom, and then we'll continue with the upper side and then put in the bolts and then do the bottom side. Okay, so I've got the seal into the bottom, just using the blunt end of that picky tool, and it's seated right to the bottom. Now we'll continue with the assembly of the upper. Okay, now we're greasing up the inside of the new bushing. Okay, now we'll install the upper bushing. Note, there's a tab on the bushing and a tab on the knuckle. The tab on the knuckle is to the outside of the vehicle, so you just place that guy in there. for now, and then it'll get pulled down once the bolts tighten on the cap. Next we're going to go ahead and place the gasket on, and then we'll place the bottom retainer for that spring, and then we'll go ahead and put the spring on. It doesn't index anywhere because that's a flat plate, and the bottom of that is flat on both sides, so it can go either way. And then we'll go ahead and put some blue Loctite on all 4 of these new bolts that we got in the kit, and then put the cap on temporarily. Don't tighten it down fully because we're going to put the bottom on next. Right, so in order to get these 4 bolts started on the top, we use this large bar clamp to clamp the cap to the bottom of the knuckle, or the bottom of the axle. And now that we have all 4 bolts started, we can go ahead and pop that clamp off for now. And then we'll get the bottom kingpin in. Okay, so we've put on the lower kingpin. Note that the kit comes with 2 gaskets, but those are both upper kingpin gaskets. The lower one doesn't have a gasket. These 4 bolts we put blue Loctite on, and they get tightened to 70 to 90 foot-pounds, so we're going to do 80. Okay, now we'll go and do the same thing to the top ones, 70 to 90 foot-pounds, we'll do 80. Okay, so after tightening down the bolts evenly to let the spring compress evenly, we'll torque these to 80 foot-pounds. Okay, we'll go ahead and install the grease fitting on the top, and then we can grease the top and the bottom. A couple squirts. Okay, now we can move on to the axle on the passenger side. You can go to different levels in restoring or replacing parts, but what we're going to do is replace these 2 rubber seals. There's also a piece here that you can replace, or also this, I think that's called the mud slinger. You can also replace that, and inside the spindle you can replace that small bearing as well, but we're just going to stick to replacing those 2 rubber seals. And at this point, if you also want to, you can replace your U-joints as well, but these ones seem to be in pretty good shape, so we're just going to do those seals. Seals are here, and there's their respective tin part numbers. In here, after you grease up the needle bearings, it goes inside of the spindle just like that, with the opening facing out to the outside. Or you can place it on the end of the axle shaft with the open end, just like that, kind of like the old one was. The larger seal goes on just over top of that large metal piece there. It just goes around the outside. There. Right, we've placed the new seal on here, and also the new seal on this spindle. Now we can go ahead, after greasing up the shaft, and just place the spindle on. Place that guy on there. Make sure that seal seats. Boom. So that I'll be able to rotate. There we go. Okay, now before placing the axle shaft back into the axle housing through the knuckle, we're going to be placing some anti-seize compound on the surface of the knuckle, because that's where the flange of the axle and spindle sits. You have to hammer on the back side, and often it won't come loose because they just seize together over time. Right, we're going to go ahead and place the axle shaft in now. It can only go on one way. And you have to line up the splines with the inside of the axle. The bolt holes will only line up one way, so you got to find the right pattern. There we go. Next, we're going to be putting on the brake caliper support and the dust shield for the brake. The support goes on first, and then the dust shield, and then there's nuts that secure it. We're going to be putting some anti-seize on here for ease of disassembly next time. Okay, so the torque limit on these nuts is 50 to 60 foot-pounds, so we're putting them at 55. Okay, now that we've got the spindle back on and torqued down, we can move on to our wheel bearings. So we've already driven out and cleaned up the hub here. I've driven out the old races. We got our new races in the freezer right now, but I'll explain how we got the old races out. Basically, just take a punch. So for the race on that side, we needed a longer punch because this is pretty deep. Then you take a long punch and just hammer on each side, going back and forth. Do that a bunch of times. Hit it pretty hard, but don't ruin where the race sits. And then it'll eventually back out. And then same thing with the race on this side. You hit it from the other side with a punch, and then just work its way out back to back, side to side. So now this is all cleaned up, and the new races are in the freezer, and we'll install those next. So we're going to be pressing in the race on this one side of the hub here, and we've got this cup that is about the same size as the race, or you can use the old race to install it, but then you'd need some way to press on it. So we just took that race out of the freezer, and now we're going to be using the press to seat that race in the hub. Okay, so we'll just get that started. Started down. Shouldn't need much effort because it was just in the freezer. There we go. And look at that, it's going in just hand tight. Might need some extra force. There we go. And that looks like it's seated there. All right, we're doing the other side now. Take note, it's handy to have a press. So we've got the new race fresh out of the freezer. It's down here somewhere. And then we got the old race on top of it, flipped the other way. And then we have this cup and then a small socket attached to the press. And now we can see we're going down. Okay, we're gonna install the seals onto the back sides of the hubs now. We've greased up we packed the wheel bearings and place them in. Make sure you don't forget that before you put the seals in. And then you're going to put the seal on, and the seal goes a certain direction. You want the lip right here. You can see the lip has a certain side where it angles. You want that lip to go towards the wheel bearing. So you see both sides here. That side where it kind of angles, you want it to face that way. So it sits in there, just like that. Okay, now both the seals are installed. We just used a piece of hardwood across here and drove it until the piece of hardwood was flush with the rest of the hub. Now we can go ahead and get our new rotors installed, and then we can reassemble everything. Okay, we just installed the new rotors onto the hub. What we did was use this pin here and then the BFH to drive in all the 8 lug studs. Now would be a good time if you need new lug studs to replace those, or to chase the threads, to clean up the threads. Now we can go ahead and put that on. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and coat the spindle thing with grease. Okay, so we placed on the new rotor hub assembly, and then just as you put that on, you push in your new wheel bearing on this side, already pre-packed with grease. And now it's resting on both wheel bearings, and then we can get to assembling the front manual locking hubs. Okay, and next we're going to be showing you how to assemble the entire hub assembly. So this is the order of the parts that you put on. You'll go these locking nuts and washers, and then this hub assembly, and then these lock snap rings, and then this spring, and then there's this nut, and the small screw that goes on, and then the outer hub. So we'll show you that whole process now. Okay, you'll need this special socket again, 4-prong. There's a part number on that. And those are for these spindle nuts. Okay, so lightly greasing all parts as you go. The first part that you're going to be installing is the spindle nut, and this one has a special nipple on it. You can see here. This is the new part that I ordered that has the nipple on it because my old one was broken. That goes on first. Alright, I just want to do a quick cutscene here. An update on how to properly tighten that front nut, the axle nut, on the Dana 60 front axle. The way that I did it during the actual installation job resulted in me having to replace my wheel bearing because it overheated on a road trip. I did a long road trip out from Ontario out to British Columbia, and my front left wheel bearing started making a noise by the end of the trip, and I suspected it was the wheel bearing because I might have installed that axle nut improperly. But anyways, the grease inside was all black and the wheel bearing race was worn out, so I had to replace that just in the driveway here. And anyways, don't follow what you read online about the just different forums or any other online person says about how you tighten these axle nuts. Follow the factory service manual, and here's the factory service manual for what it says on tightening that front axle nut to get the proper wheel bearing adjustment. So you install the install that first inner lock nut onto the spindle, tighten that lock nut to 50 pounds, and that seats the bearings. So once you have that tightened down to 50 foot-pounds using that special socket, you loosen it right off. So once you loosen that nut, you're going to re-tighten it down to 31 to 39 foot-pounds of torque while you're rotating the hub. And then as soon as you've gotten that torque rating while you're rotating it. You're gonna back off that nut 135 to 150 degrees, and that'll set your free play. So the mistake that I made was I tightened it and then I backed it off a quarter turn, and I think that's all I did. So that's how you do that. And then so once you have that first nut adjusted properly, then you stick on your locking tab washer to get the little tit lined up with the lock washer. And you can, when you're rotating to align it with a hole, always rotate it out so you're not going tighter on the wheel bearing. So once you have that lock washer on, then you put your second retaining nut on. It's called the outer lock nut, and you tighten down the outer lock nut to 160 to 205 foot-pounds. And then if you have a special tool, you can check the end play on the bearing, and it says to be within 0.001 inch to 0.01 inches. And that's just the wheel in and out on the bearing. So that's the proper way to do it. Very important, so follow that step. And that's just it there in writing, in case you don't want to listen to me talk. Alright, so next we'll take this hub spindle assembly thing and throw that guy in there. Okay, so we might have another issue with getting the snap ring on the inside, but what we'll have to do is get a pry bar from the back and push out the axle. So I'll do that now, because the inner snap ring goes on the axle there, and there's a snap ring that also goes on the outside. So we'll just pry back the axle a bit. And then there we go. Should be enough room to get that small snap ring on. There we go, that one's on. Now we'll get the large snap ring. There we go. And next, we'll take our spring, get that guy in there. And then this, I don't know what that's called. We gotta take that screw out first though. I just put that there so I didn't lose it. What would you call that? Gear thing?
No idea.
And then we'll take our screwdriver, tighten that back down. These are very greasy. Okay. And then once that's on, we'll put the cover back on with all the Allen screws. Yeah. And if you're wondering why I know how to do this so quickly, it's because we just did the other side. Much slower.
A lot more sweat too. Nice grill cover. What would you call that? A grill cover? Or
Winter front, I think.
a winter front? Ooh.
Yeah.
Sounds like a storm, actually.
Winter front.
A winter front is coming from the south.
Winter front. Alright, I guess you don't need to record. Alright, so we got the brakes back on. We got the wheels back on. Hubcaps back on. We're not going to do a test drive tonight. We'll just clean up. Actually, no, we won't clean up. We'll clean up tomorrow, and then we'll do a test drive. And hopefully all of our death wobble issues are solved.
All right, we just went for a test drive, hit some potholes, and went over lots of bumps, slowing down, and there seemed to be no issues. Probably about a 10-minute drive, and within that 10-minute drive, something would have happened before. So all's good so far. So that's probably the fix for the death wobble. So if you're looking to do your kingpins or your wheel bearings, hopefully this video helps out. And like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.